I know, I know. You all are expecting me to go into some big spiel about some kind of concept with regards to writing or whatnot today. Because I've been doing it with the last several videos. I am not. But, as per my thing, I do want to mention right here at the beginning positives about this episode. Because, that's what I do. So, positives! I do like the way they present the robot logic within this episode. It does seem very robot-like, and it does strike me as exactly what it should have been given the circumstances. Right, now that that's over with, let's talk about this episode. First of all, there was a good moment in the teaser in this episode, but I feel like it went on entirely too long. The teaser, in my opinion, should have ended as soon as they'd finished the conversation with Bellona, Tuvok, and Janeway. Right there at the beginning after... Because, for those of you who aren't aware, it starts off, shot of Voyager, then you're beamed on board, and then you see the three of them look at it. Okay, that's interesting. It gives us virtually nothing. It very much is a teaser, but then they show them talking and debating about what to do and how to interact with it, and then it goes on and on and on, and then the robot turns and looks at a display panel and it sees itself! End of teaser! It feels like it completely destroyed any dramatic value it might have had, and that's actually one of the reasons I don't like this episode in general. It tends to do that a lot. So, here's something that makes no sense to me. Throughout this episode, with one exception, Bellona continuously shows this tremendous interest and vested personal interest in fixing this robot, right from the get-go, mind you. And she likes to do, in addition to that, she likes to anthropomorphize it, treat it as though it's a human, treat it as though it's a person. Now, this may sound weird coming from me, given how big I am on rights for non-normal sentient creatures, such as the Doctor, for example. But I'm one of those weird people who look at this episode and think, it's just so distracting to me how interested, how vested Bellona is in this, for basically no reason. And the worst part is she's never actually given a reason. Now, towards the end, she gets interested in the prototype that she builds. That makes sense, because she built this guy basically from just a bit of blueprint and whatnot, and successfully created a prototype for a new type of creature. Okay, I'm with that. Bravo. But the rest of the time, why is she so invested in this? It seems like something that either should have been explained or had something to do with her character or some examination, but it literally feels like someone just walked up one day and smacked a badge onto her that said, "You are now interested in this, act like it." It doesn't actually show us anything about her character. It doesn't show us anything about her past or history or anything. It's just she's suddenly interested in this robot and thinks it's one of them. It's weird. Anyways. It's very distracting for me. Now, there was one thing I liked about the intro before I bash on this episode too much. The banter between her and Harry Kim I actually liked towards the beginning, where they're talking about, she wants to keep going, he wants to take a rest, blah, 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 blah. And it's just light banter. I don't really have much to say there. I just like it. I also like the callback. For those of you not aware, she calls Harry Starfleet, which is something she was referring to him as. Actually, rather affection at first as an insult, and then affectionately, way back in Caretaker. Nice callback, and it actually was a nice scene. So props there. I'm just kind of barreling through these because the majority of what I have to talk about today is actually going to be a little bit weird, so bear with me. This episode was supposed to come out for Halloween, but I failed at that for real life reasons. Sorry. It'll make sense in a bit. Anyways. I have a note here which literally just says, "Neelix is a bad cook! Joke!" I know. You're probably tired of hearing me hear about it, but just to make this point clear, I'm really tired of the Neelix is a bad cook joke. I really am. They actually do it twice in this episode. Once at the beginning, and once towards the end, where... Actually, I guess they do it 3 times now that I'm thinking about it. Once at the beginning, once immediately after that, and once toward the end where Bellana's like, "I never thought, his coffee would actually taste good." Guys, let it go. It's not funny. It was never funny. Let it go. Moving on. Again, it's so weird because I've got so many positive things to say about this episode in small details. I liked the fact that Neelix was right about the obvious solution. Not only does that make sense for Neelix to tell it to her, But it makes sense because it is true. In fact, it actually irritated me how much Bellona just completely discounted him, even though he was correct. Because his story, in summary, is that he was missing a seasoning for his thing, and the thing he was missing was salt. Now, he may have been making that up or not, but the parable here is obvious. And that's the point. Sometimes the obvious solution doesn't occur to you when you've worked on a problem so long. Sometimes we need to just refresh our minds. So, okay, I'm with that. Okay. What immediately happens after that is Bellona goes down, and I actually counted. She has exactly 3 seconds of, from the moment she stopped moving and laying in bed to immediately lunging up out of bed and rushing out. 3 seconds. Now, I could name several reasons why that's wrong. From a director's perspective, it just seems silly. From an in-character's perspective, it seems worse. The idea that she laid down, closed her eyes, and then had 3 seconds of, okay, I'm not thinking about the problem, to immediately come upon the solution. Yeah, the whole thing, that whole scene seemed so unnecessary and so padding, and that's another problem this episode tends to have extensively. There's a lot of padding in this episode, but let's just move on. Technobabble. One of these days, it's my goal to find a Voyager episode that does not have technobabble in it. I may fail in that. There may be no such thing, or at the very least, no bad technobabble. But this is an example of some of the worst technobabble I've actually heard to date in Voyager, and the reason why it can be best described as this. The more you know about something, the more you tend to understand when someone's utilizing it properly or not. Let me give you a video game example, because I know several of my audience are into that. When we watched The Wizard, way back in the 80s or 90s or whenever that was, those of us who actually knew video games knew that they were actually doing it wrong, and it was worse for us because of that. Now, let me explain that a little bit better for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. If you're trying to intimate that you are referencing or acknowledging something like science or physics or video games or sports or whatever, if you put some effort into it, you might be able to fool people who know nothing about it. But the more you know about it, the more you're going to know they're making it up. And the more you know about it, the worse it actually irks you, at least in my experience, and the experience of several people I've talked to about this. So when they have technobabble like in this episode, even if you don't really know much, it probably sounds like just gibberish. The more you know about physics and the more you know about biology, of all things, because of the way they're talking about it, the more you understand that what she's talking about is ludicrous, complete, pointless, senseless nonsense. Let me give you another example here, if you still don't quite get my point here. Let's talk about Warcraft. That's a setting I know very well, okay? Now, for any of you who know anything about Warcraft, this will make my point. For those of you who don't, I do apologize, but last night I was on my shaman, and after getting a full set of combo points when I was fighting the boss, which was actually at the bottom of Deadmind's keep, I ended up interacting with the wrong interactable, the wrong loot table. And that caused me to get a natural 100 on whether or not I actually managed to resist the spell that was being cast at me by the last boss. Now, again, for those of you who know anything about Warcraft, you know I basically was completely just throwing things from Warcraft together in a way that doesn't make sense or isn't accurate. And that's the problem with this kind of technobabble. It's just nonsense. It literally doesn't mean anything. You might as well you literally could replace the scenes where Bellona was ranting with her ranting in Klingon, and we, the audience, would have had literally the exact same amount of I'm sorry, it would have been a better experience in my opinion, but I'm going to stop. Let's talk about the robots for a moment. We will talk about the robots, because a lot of people dislike this episode for a reason that actually doesn't bother me at all, and that's that the robots look incredibly cheap. As weird as this sounds, that doesn't bother me, and in fact I would keep that true in my changes section, although for very intentional and deliberate reasons. The reasons they looked so cheap was because of time and budget, is just basically what it boiled down to. And a lot of people were really disappointed about that. And a lot of people who made this episode were really disappointed in the way it went, because it came off as very hokey and cheesy. And, fair enough. I will give credence where credit is due. This is the last episode Jonathan Frakes directed on Voyager, and I think he actually did a good job with it, all things considered. Especially since some people don't even know this, but those masks the robots had, they actually had slits, so the actors in them could see what they were doing. And if you really pay attention or have one of the high-quality copies, you might actually notice those slits, but in general you won't, because Jonathan Frakes is a good director and knew how to do his camera angles in order to make sure you couldn't see him. So, again, props. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. While the robots looked hokey and cheesy and were obviously very I mean, it looked like a guy with a mask and a pajama suit. The thing I actually like most about it is actually the mask. I think that the completely expressionless yet nevertheless humanoid face was exactly what the robots needed to have. We didn't want to humanize them too much, like we did with Data and Brent Spiner. We didn't want to make them too much the other direction, like making them look like a Dalek, for example. A Dalek shell, obviously, not the actual Dalek. We wanted something that looked pretty much straight on Uncanny Valley, right in the middle there, and I think they did a good job with it. So, weird as this is going to sound, props. And I will give them credit for the foreshadowing. They talk about the bleeding problem early on. Unfortunately, don't really do much with that foreshadowing. I would actually do something as well, personally. But they do actually have a decent amount of foreshadowing to the actual problem and the actual build-up. Even though anybody who's ever watched sci-fi ever was probably watching this episode going, "You're all idiots!" Because we could probably guess the big twist, if you could even call it that, from like scene 2, I'd say, give or take. Maybe scene 3. Anyways. Let's talk about two other little nitbits, and then I'm going to go into two big things, and then I'm going to go into changes. It's kind of a quick video, forgive me. First of all, Bellona's kidnapping. Okay, that made a degree of sense, and I liked it for various reasons. I like the idea that the robot is still treating her as if, she is a friendly, to put it into simple terms, when he grabs her, electrocutes her, and then takes everyone out and then kidnaps her. For some reason, I liked the way they presented that. However, I felt the kidnapping was kind of poorly done overall, and the total lack of action in the actual kidnapping scene was kind of pathetic. This is a problem Voyager tends to have in general. I talked about this back in Maneuvers, for example, when a scene that should be action-packed, either literally or at least in sense of actual in character, in story, it just comes across as tepid. And it's just a bunch of people sitting around like talking about a situation, not actually doing anything that puts us out of a situation, and then talking about a situation more, and then the ship gets pulverized at the end. It seemed very poorly done, all things considered, and that's mostly a writing problem, I would say, because the whole situation happens in such a ridiculous concept. It's like, I'm detecting an energy surge. What? What's happening? Several seconds pass. Someone's trying to beam out. Override them. I'm sorry. I hate to pull armchair general here, but here's a thought. Raise the shields! 'Cause you can't beam through the shields. Okay. Maybe, you know what? I'm letting it go. I'm letting it go. I'm letting it go. But literally, that whole scene, even if we ignore the things they did wrong, which were several, it's just them being like, oh my god, what do we do? Let's take the worst action possible. And then they all sit and wait for the worst action possible to not work. And then, okay, well, maybe we should try this. I mean, there's a scene where the ship's getting pulverized by the enemy ship, and I do mean pulverized. They're talking about, gravity being lost, life support being lost. One of the earlier bits is, we should go to warp. All right, let's go to warp. I think it would be a good idea for us to go to warp. Yes, warp, let us go to. Warp, go to, let us go. Warp 2, let go. Yes, let's go warp 2. And after, I believe it was 12 solid seconds of debating, of saying how it's a great idea to go to warp, they say, Tom, again, this is like another 5 seconds, Tom, go to warp, and then ship shakes and the warp drives are knocked out. God, it struck me as so just poorly constructed. I don't know about you guys, but with an ace pilot like Tom, who, as we've demonstrated, is the most competent character in the show and will remain that pretty much until 7 shows up, and even then will debatably still be one of the most competent characters on the show, would probably have immediately, as soon as they were like, yes, it's a great idea to go to warp, turned the ship around and gone to warp. Anyways, so moving along, that's the little things. Let's talk about the big things. Let's talk about the Prime Directive. I've made my opinion on the Prime Directive very clear. I think it's poorly handled. I think it's poorly executed. However, I am going to say something that's going to sound weird with regard to this episode. I do agree with Janeway in the idea that this is a circumstance in which it would not be a good idea to fundamentally alter the way these creatures reproduce without further thought and analysis. I did have to finish that sentence. That's the problem when I mentioned, that's what I talk about with execution. Janeway's perspective and the way they often tend to take the Prime Directive in Voyager is the absolute line of coded writ law, and none shall vary from this, the most holy of Prime Directives. And that just bugs the crap out of me. And that's exactly how she presents herself in this one. You have no idea what the consequences are, therefore we will take no action. Forgive me for dissecting this comment for just a little bit, but you have no idea what the consequences will be of anything you do ever. There is always a chance, however minute and however small, that things will not go as expected, and you have no concept of what those consequences will be, or whether they will be positive or negative. And while I'm on the subject, I could even use your own argument to defeat you. Because by your own admission, you don't know what the consequences will be, and therefore, by not helping these people, you may be... by the way, yes, I know this argument's been used before. Forgive me for borrowing it, but whatever. By the fact that you don't know what the consequences may be, you may be stopping a force that would become, theoretically, a force of good to help unite the galaxy and save millions of lives, that you are stopping because you have no idea what the consequences will be. And it may be that they just may be people. It bothers me so fundamentally that what this boils down to, if you'll forgive me for being utterly blunt and a little bit acerbic at the moment, is this boils down to cowardice. That's really what this particular application, and several other times this is applied like this. This was applied back in not Parallax. This was way back in season. Hang on, I'll just look at the episode right now. Give me a moment. I need to look here actually because I deleted the season 1 episodes. Don't read into that. Here we go. Okay. Time and Again. 3rd episode of the series. Way back in Time and Again, this is another example where the Prime Directive was applied like this. And this is not the only time, it's just that's a big one. You have no idea what the consequences be, and therefore we will take no action. That particular type of application of the Prime Directive is, forgive me for being blunt, cowardice. It is not owning up to responsibility. It is not owning up to circumstance. It is not acknowledging that life is more complicated than something that can be viewed as black or white. It is cowardly, and it is an act of cowardice. Thank you. Moving on. Now, let's talk about AI. AI is a subject that's very interesting to me because the way it's applied across all of fiction can vary significantly between interesting, disinteresting, well done, fascinating, just really, really poorly done, et cetera, right? There's many different ways to apply it, but in my opinion, one of the best ways to apply AI is to treat it as though it is a truly alien sentience, okay? In other words, it simply does not think the way we do. Now, it doesn't have to be, completely alien, like, for example, the aliens from the Alien series, which are actually fairly alien. I'm getting tired of saying that word. When you actually sit down and analyze them as a species from a mindset, what they're after, what they're interested in, what they like, what they dislike, do such things, even have a concept with them, they're fairly alien. But I don't mean you need to necessarily go that far. But one thing I think this episode does fairly well, and I mentioned this early, was the way the robots have their own form of logic, their own mindset that makes sense to them. Their way of thinking is so fundamentally logical, and if you actually analyze the episode, as I have done so, everything the robots do actually makes perfect sense within their own continuity, within their own mindset. There are no plot holes in their actions. And I kind of like that, actually. It's a definite prop, a definite upside for Voyager to have such self-contiguous continuity like that. Self-contiguous sense-making, basically, right? So the idea that the robots would, when their creators started turning on them, the builders would be reclassified as enemy, makes perfect sense. And of course, what do they do with all enemies? Well, they have to defeat all enemies, right? Now, even that, however, can take occasion or circumstance. For example, they know that their species, such as it is, will be extinct if they do not get this new powers module made. So when Bellona Taurus makes the deal in order to agree to build this, if they spare the Voyager crew, even though the Voyager crew is classified as an enemy, A, there's no problem with making that deal, and B, to be a little bit blunt, I actually personally think that it is very likely that after Bellona had successfully created it, they would have then destroyed the Voyager crew, because the Voyager crew were classified as enemies. And this wouldn't be a betrayal. That's the funny thing, and that's the thing I like about the way this is presented. It's not betrayal in their minds, because they don't understand the very concept of betrayal. They understand you are an enemy, and you are not. And everything else is based on these rules, and I like that. And I like the way that it's presented in this episode. Now, There is one other thing I want to talk about here. Oh wait, no, there isn't. Let's talk about did I like it then and now. I think this is one of those strange episodes that I liked more the first time I saw it, back when I first saw it, than I did this time. Because the first time I saw it, it was just a hokey robots, pseudo story. I wouldn't even call it Bellona story because it really wasn't a Bellona story. Bellona doesn't change or grow or anything. You could literally replace Bellona with a one-up mushroom here. This is now the main character of this episode. All you have to do is feed the lines into this one-up, and nothing actually changes in the episode, with the exception of the banter between her and Carrie Kim. I'll give them that. But you get my point. It wasn't a Bellona episode. It was just a hokey, simple robot episode. This time watching it, actually analyzing it, actually going in depth on it, yeah, I really didn't like this episode this time around a lot less than I was expecting to. And I really wish, frankly, that they'd done more with it. Now, let's talk about my changes, okay? This is where the Halloween thing kind of comes in. I want you to imagine that rather than finding this random robot laying in space, the teaser is actually them beaming into some facility, either on an asteroid or something like that, right? And as they're roaming around amongst the corpses of whatever race used to be here, they encounter a robot which is obviously malfunctioning but still has a power supply. Cut to credits. That's the teaser, right? Now let's have Bellona start working on this thing. Now I want to stress, Bellona would not personify this thing as she does in the episode, and she would not get obsessed over this thing, at least not yet. Rather, what I would do, and I'm just going to explain it here rather than draw you through the whole act, is I would have it so that as she works more and more on this problem, she becomes more invested in it because she is putting so much of her time and effort into it. And in case you're paying attention, yes, I would have this episode occur over the course of a fairly decent period of time, at least a week, as she is working on this problem and working with it. One other thing I would do is very similar to how they did it. I would throw the foreshadowing in about the bleeding power source and just have a one-off line, like right towards the beginning, like right as she's analyzing it, as she's looking at the power source. And she says, just mention something about the power source intentionally bleeding, and for some reason it's completely coded just to this robot. And then just have her kind of shake her head and say, whoever built these guys are idiots. And then just leave it at that. And so, it would obviously come back towards the end. I would also restructure the source of the episode in general, but basically, the very end of the first act would take a while until that point, at which point they would finally actually reactivate the robot, and he would get up and blah blah blah. The second act would be interacting with the robot, learning more about him and his people. A couple things I would do, just little tidbits I want to toss out here. First of all, I would have him praise the people who made him, talk about them in loving, flourishing terms. You may think I'm doing that to exemplify the tragedy of what happens to them. You are wrong. I am doing that because it makes most sense to me that a species, based on what we know about these people, the Prelor, and based on how they interact with each other and their servants, after all, you'll learn a lot about someone by how they treat their lessers, that they would automatically program all of their servant units to automatically think of them as these wonderful, enlightened people that are incredible and blah, 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 blah. So it's actually speaking about the people, but in a negative light, by speaking about them in a positive light, if you understand where I'm going with that. And so then, we'd learn more about them. We go through the space. Bellona starts working on the power supply long term, and thinks she has, possibly the ability to fix this. She's not really sure. The end of the second act would be them encountering the other Prelor vessel and, the serving unit talking to the war unit and being willing to beam over. Now, I'm undecided as to the best way to execute this. But the final act would actually be when we find out that the Prelor are all dead. And we would find it out without being over on that ship. We would find it out on Voyager. And the unit, what I'm trying to get across here is that the unit with us, I don't remember his number, and Bellona and Janeway, and of course the viewers would all learn this fact as one. However, this is when that robot logic comes in, because I would have the unit on the other ship explain very simply they attempted to deactivate us and became the enemy. And, Bellona would be like, oh, that's horrible. And Jane would be like, that's terrible, or whatever, and have a defensive reaction. But I would want the unit on this one, the servant unit that Bellona reactivated, to immediately and apparently understand, yeah, that makes sense. And then he would then immediately and understand, he would then convey to the other one, this builder has found a way to solve the energy problem. has, or no, I'm sorry, this has solved energy problem. The other one says energy problem is significant, priority one or whatever, and then there would be the escape kidnapping scene, which would be better done. I'm just going to say that and move on. Get over there. Now here's a scene that's very important to the overall development of this episode. I know we're still all the way in Act 3. First of all, Voyager would warp away immediately after they started getting pasted by the enemy ship. Bellana's over here, and the serving unit. One of the things I would emphasize is whoever does the voice for this guy, for this unit, has to have an extremely polite, almost light-hearted tone. Nothing saccharine. Nothing. Hi, I'm here to serve you. But a very polite, almost a butlery sort of, I accept everything, and very light-hearted, very cheerful kind of a tone. And that tone should never waver, because what should happen next is the serving unit should then go to Bellona and say, if you'll forgive me for doing a bad attempt at this, Unit Bellona Torres, you will now construct for us a prototype of the, of the new power source you've devised, and in that way we will be able to extend our species. And then Bellona would refuse. I don't think I'd have her be stupid or apparent about it, but she'd be like, "No, of course not. You've kidnapped me. Return me to my ship." And then I would get a phone call. Oh my God, really? Really? Can you wait like 10 minutes? Or is this important? Is this important? Okay, I'll call you back. Timing. Anyways, God, I lost my train of thought. So, Bellona would say, no, of course not, I refuse. And then in that exact same light, cheery tone, I anticipated such a thing might be a problem. And they would produce a tool. It doesn't matter what the tool is, but it has to look curved and wicked and possibly rusty. It depends on the specific of the aesthetics of the situation. I would also accept jagged. But either way, it would then continue in the exact same tone. Given the situation, I have calculated that I may be able to remove no less than 3 of your toes and possibly fingers without detrimentally affecting your performance. I will do so now. And then just kind of moving towards her in this extremely light, airy tone. And then Bellona would be like, "No, wait, what are you doing?" And the mouse says, and the unit would then say, "Oh, do not be concerned. I have already calculated that it would be the amount of blood loss you may sustain without having permanent injury. I will be sure to avoid that." And then continue to go after her. And the whole idea would be to just really emphasize the creepy nature of the difference between their mindset and a sentient, feeling, thinking being's mindset. To really emphasize that these aren't people is really what I'm getting at here. That these aren't data. These aren't the Doctor. These aren't holograms that have sentience. These are literally just automatons that do not understand anything about this. They do not have true sentience. They are simply going based off of base programming and nothing more advanced than that. And really emphasize the sort of creepy undertone of that. And the rest of the thing would be him just... And of course, as soon as Bellona agrees, he says, I was worried that I would have to remove no less than 2 of your digits in order to obtain your approval. I am pleased with this. And then puts the tool back. He's still holding the 2 digits thing. You may proceed. And then just so polite, so kind about it. And, as she's working, he would still be a dutiful assistant. Of course, let me get this for you. Would you like some water? I know you might need rest. Just things like that. Really emphasizing the bizarre way that they function and the way they think, if you get where I'm going with this. Now, I wouldn't really change anything much about the finale. However, I would change a couple things. First of all, 2 things I want to emphasize. One, I would definitely have Tom rescue her. I would also have Tom and her have some dialogue on the way back. We've already seen that Tom and Bellona have a decent chemistry, both the actors and the characters. 2, it would be nice foreshadowing for what's to come. And 3, I think it would be fitting given the circumstances. Last thing I would change is I would change the coda significantly. I would make it so Bellona never actually successfully makes the prototype. She's rescued before that happens. For various reasons that basically boil down to I feel like it makes more sense that way, both writing and from an in-character perspective. After all, there's nothing to say that they couldn't have analyzed what she was doing while she was doing it or been able to repair the damage she did to the prototype, just to name one thing off the top of my head. But the last thing I would change is I would have there be a coda. But that coda would be a lot different, because the coda would be Bellona and Janeway talking about the circumstances and the other ship shows up. I already, like I said, I don't change that. Other ship shows up, gives them a window, they escape. I would have them talking about how strange it is, what happened, and the overall tone. I'll just skip ahead rather than going into words because I need to call her back. The overall tone would be the idea, because this is the idea I actually want to be the overall theme of this episode. Which, if you watch this episode, you notice this episode doesn't have a theme. It doesn't have a point. It just kind of exists. It's probably one of the biggest problems with it. But in my version, the theme would be very simply: technology is neutral. Technology is what we make of it and what we do with it. It is not good. It is not bad, inherently or otherwise. It is what we make of it and what we do with it. And that would be in case I wasn't doing this appropriately, that would basically be the coda, as Janeway and Bellona talking about that. So I'm going to shut up now. And hopefully I will talk to you guys soon, because let's see, what's the next episode? Let's go look here. Voyager. Season 2, after Prototype, we have... Oh, God, we have Alliances next. I'll see you guys next time.